As I sit in my prison cell, reflecting on the journey that brought me here, I am reminded of the cruel irony of fate. How did a child abuse activist, dedicated to protecting the vulnerable, end up behind bars for committing the very crime he had sworn to prevent? The answer lies in the darkest corners of my past, in the traumatic experiences that shaped me into the person I am today. It is a story of pain, of suffering, and of the long and winding road to redemption. Growing up, I was a victim of child abuse at the hands of Auntie Esi, a woman who was supposed to care for me. Her actions left an indelible mark on my psyche, a scar that would take years to heal. But I survived. I thrived. And I dedicated my life to ensuring that no child would ever have to endure the same horrors that I did. My organization, Feel Safe, became a beacon of hope for victims of child abuse, providing them with the support and counseling they needed to heal. Or so I thought. Little did I know, my past was not as buried as I had believed. The demons I thought I had vanquished were still lurking, waiting to pounce. And pounce they did, leading me down a path of destruction that would ultimately land me in prison. As I sit here, awaiting my fate, I am forced to confront the darkest aspects of my own nature. How did a child abuse activist become a perpetrator of the very crime he had sworn to prevent? The answer, I fear, lies in the complexities of the human psyche. It lies in the darkest recesses of our own hearts, where the lines between good and evil are often blurred. And it is this complexity, this duality, that I will explore in this part of my story. Years later, Kofi would look back on his ordeal with Auntie Esi and shudder at the memory of her evil actions. But he would also feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that he had survived and thrived despite the trauma he had endured. Kofi, suffering abuse as a child, grew to become a renowned child abuse activist in Awushi, Tenda. Kofi has dedicated his life to protecting children from abuse and neglect. His organization provides counseling and support services to victims of child abuse. Kofi's organization is a non-profit organization that aims to provide a safe and supportive environment for children who have been victims of abuse and neglect. The mission of his organization is to protect children from all forms of abuse and neglect, and to provide them with the necessary support and resources to heal and recover. The organization's vision is to create a society where children are valued, respected, and protected from harm. Kofi's organization provides a range of services to victims of child abuse, including counseling and therapy. The organization provides one-on-one counseling and therapy sessions to help children process their trauma and emotions. Support groups. It runs support groups for children who have been victims of abuse, providing them with a safe space to share their experiences and connect with others who have gone through similar situations. Advocacy. The organization advocates for the rights of children and works to raise awareness about the issue of child abuse across various countries in Africa. Education. It also provides educational programs and workshops to children, parents, and caregivers on topics such as child safety, abuse prevention, and healthy relationships. Kofi is the founder and executive director of Feel Safe. He is a passionate advocate for children's rights and has dedicated his life to protecting children from abuse and neglect. Then comes Aya, who had been living a nightmare for months. Her father, a well-respected member of their community, had been abusing her physically and emotionally. Aya's mother was oblivious to the abuse, and Aya was too afraid to tell her. She felt trapped and alone, with no one to turn to. That was when Aya stumbled upon Kofi's story. Kofi, a renowned child abuse activist, had been vocal about his own experiences with child abuse. His story was one of resilience and courage, and it resonated deeply with Aya. Kofi's story was so relatable to Aya because he had been in her shoes before. He understood the fear, the shame, and the guilt that came with being abused. He had spoken publicly about how he had been abused by a family member, and how it had affected him for years. Aya felt a sense of comfort and security when she heard Kofi's story. She felt like she could trust him, like he would understand her without judging her. That was why she decided to seek counseling from him. Aya's decision to seek counseling from Kofi was not taken lightly. She had been struggling with the abuse for months, and she felt like she had nowhere else to turn. She hoped that Kofi could help her find a way out of her situation, and that he could provide her with the support and guidance she needed. As Aya sat in Kofi's office, waiting for her counseling session to begin, she felt a sense of nervousness wash over her. She had never spoken to anyone about the abuse before, and she wasn't sure how Kofi would react. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw kindness and compassion there, and she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in months. Kofi's reputation as a child abuse activist had been built on his charismatic personality and his ability to connect with his audience. However, behind closed doors, Kofi had been using his position of power to exploit and abuse the very children he claimed to protect. There had been others who had come to Kofi, all of whom had been drawn to Kofi's charismatic personality and his promise of help and support. One of Kofi's earlier victims was a young girl named Abina. Abina had been referred to Kofi's organization by a social worker, who had been impressed by Kofi's reputation as a child abuse activist. Abina had been hesitant to trust Kofi at first, but he had been patient and kind, slowly gaining her trust over time. However, as their counseling sessions progressed, Kofi's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. He began to make suggestive comments and gestures, which made Abina feel uncomfortable and trapped. Despite her fear, Abina tried to brush off Kofi's behavior, telling herself that he was just trying to help her. However, as the abuse continued, Abina realized that she had to escape. She stopped attending counseling sessions and tried to distance herself from Kofi. But Kofi was relentless. He began to harass Abina, showing up at her home and sending her threatening messages. Abina was terrified, and she didn't know where to turn. Eventually, Abina found the courage to report Kofi's abuse to the authorities. However, Kofi's reputation and charisma had already done their damage. Many people refused to believe Abina's story, and Kofi was able to continue his abuse unchecked. Aya was unaware of Kofi's dark past when she sought his help. She trusted him implicitly, believing that he would keep her secret and provide her with the support she needed. As Aya finished explaining her ordeal to Kofi, he stood up from his office chair and walked over to the couch where Aya was sitting. He sat down beside her, his expression sympathetic and concerned. "I'm so sorry, Aya," Kofi said, his voice soft and gentle. "No one deserves to go through what you've been through." Aya felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at Kofi. She felt a sense of relief wash over her, knowing that she had finally told someone about her ordeal. Kofi reached out and put a hand on Aya's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're safe now, Aya," he said. "I'm here to help you." Aya felt a sense of comfort wash over her at Kofi's touch. She felt like she could trust him, like he knew better than to hurt her. But as Kofi's hand lingered on her shoulder, Aya began to feel a sense of unease. She didn't know why, but something about Kofi's touch didn't feel right. As Kofi's hand moved down her arm and onto her leg, Aya felt a jolt of fear. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she didn't want Kofi touching her like that. "Aya, are you okay?" Kofi asked, his voice low and soothing. "You seem a little tense." Aya nodded, trying to play it cool. "I'm fine," she said. "Just a little overwhelmed, I guess." Kofi nodded sympathetically. "I understand," he said. "It's a lot to process." But as Kofi continued to touch her leg, Aya felt her discomfort growing. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she had to get out of there. As Aya tried to leave, Kofi quickly stood up and apologized for making her feel uncomfortable. "I'm so sorry, Aya," he said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. Please, let me get you a drink to calm your nerves." Aya hesitated for a moment, but Kofi's apology and offer of a drink put her at ease. She nodded, and Kofi went to his desk to pour her a glass of water. As he handed her the glass, Aya noticed that the water looked a bit cloudy, but she didn't think much of it. She took a sip, and suddenly, she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The next thing Aya knew, she was feeling disoriented and confused. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt like jelly. She looked around, trying to get her bearings, but everything seemed fuzzy and unclear. As Aya slowly regained consciousness, she was met with a wave of confusion and disorientation. Her head was spinning, and her body felt heavy and unresponsive. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her head, forcing her to lie back down. As she struggled to make sense of her surroundings, Aya's gaze fell upon Kofi, who was standing beside her, his face etched with a mixture of guilt and shame. His clothes were disheveled, and his belt was undone. Aya's eyes widened in horror as she realized the truth. She had been taken advantage of by Kofi, someone she had trusted and respected. The evidence of the assault was clear, her underwear was missing, and Kofi's clothes were in disarray. Aya felt a wave of nausea wash over her, followed by a deep sense of shame and betrayal. She couldn't believe that Kofi, someone she had considered a friend, could do something so heinous, and then, she saw Kofi's face, looming over her with a sinister grin. Aya tried to scream, but her voice was hoarse and barely audible. She tried to struggle, but her body felt heavy and unresponsive. As Aya confronted Kofi about his abuse, her voice trembled with rage and fear. "How could you, Kofi?" she demanded. "You're supposed to be helping me, not hurting me." Kofi's expression turned cold and calculating, and he sneered at Aya. "You're just a foolish little girl," he spat. "You don't know what's good for you." Aya's anger boiled over, and she launched herself at Kofi, determined to make him pay for what he had done. But as they struggled, Aya lost her footing and fell, hitting her head on a vase in Kofi's office. As Aya lay on the floor, bleeding profusely, Kofi's expression changed from anger to shock and then to calculation. He knew he had to cover up the crime, or his reputation and career would be ruined. Kofi quickly grabbed a towel and pressed it to Aya's wound, trying to stem the bleeding. But it was too late. Aya's eyes glazed over, and she went limp, her body still and lifeless. Kofi was left alone in his office, staring at Aya's lifeless body. He knew he had to act fast, or he would be caught and punished for his crime. He quickly came up with a plan, using his charm and charisma to cover up the truth. Kofi quickly sent his secretary home, telling her that he had everything under control. But his secretary, Mrs. Wade, was suspicious of Kofi's behavior. She had seen the look of panic in his eyes, and she knew that something was wrong. Instead of going home, Mrs. Wade decided to stick around and keep an eye on Kofi. She hid behind a pillar in the hallway, watching as Kofi pulled a large bag out of his office. As Kofi walked down the hallway, Mrs. Wade noticed that his shirt was stained with blood. She felt a chill run down her spine, and she knew that she had to be careful. Kofi went to the back of the building, where he had a private entrance to his office. Mrs. Wade followed him, keeping a safe distance. She watched in horror as Kofi chopped Aya's body into pieces, put her in a plastic bag, and buried her in a shallow grave. Mrs. Wade felt like she was going to be sick, and she knew that she had to get out of there before Kofi saw her. She quickly ran back to her car and drove home, her heart racing with fear. She knew that she had to tell someone what she had seen, but she was afraid of what might happen to her if Kofi found out. Mrs. Wade spent the rest of the night in a state of panic, trying to decide what to do next. She knew that she had to report what she had seen, but she was afraid of the consequences. Aya's mother, Mrs. Wade, was frantic with worry. She had not seen or heard from her daughter in days, and she knew that something was terribly wrong. She went to the police station and reported Aya missing. The police launched an investigation into Aya's disappearance, and they began by interviewing her friends and family. They also reviewed the security footage from Aya's neighborhood, but it didn't show anything suspicious. As the investigation continued, the police discovered that Aya had been seen arguing with Kofi, her former mentor, a few days before she went missing. They decided to pay Kofi a visit and ask him some questions. When the police arrived at Kofi's office, they met with his secretary, Mrs. Wade. She seemed nervous and fidgety, and the police could tell that she was hiding something. "Can you tell us about Aya's last visit to this office?" one of the detectives asked. Mrs. Wade hesitated before answering. "Yes, Aya came to see Kofi a few days ago. They were arguing about something, but I don't know what it was." The police thanked Mrs. Wade for her time and asked to speak with Kofi. But Kofi was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared, leaving behind only a cryptic note that said he was going out of town on business. The police were suspicious of Kofi's sudden disappearance, and they began to investigate him further. They discovered that Kofi had a history of misconduct, and they started to suspect that he might be involved in Aya's disappearance. As the police continued their investigation, they found more and more evidence that pointed to Kofi's guilt. They discovered a security camera that had caught a glimpse of Kofi's car near the area where I was last seen. They also found a piece of fabric near Kofi's office that matched the description of Aya's clothing. The police were closing in on Kofi, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they found him and brought him to justice. The neighboring police stations were contacted, and a search was declared on Kofi's account. The police worked tirelessly to gather information on his whereabouts, and finally, they received the tip that Kofi was hiding in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. A raid was made on the warehouse, and Kofi was caught off guard. In an attempt to flee, he was shot in the foot by one of the police officers. He was quickly subdued and taken into custody. Kofi was taken to court, where he was sentenced to death by electric chair. As he sat in his cell, waiting for his execution, Kofi couldn't help but think about the gravity of his mistakes. On the day of his execution, Kofi was led to the electric chair, his eyes scanning the crowd of witnesses gathered to watch him pay for his crimes. As the electrodes were attached to his head and legs, Kofi took a deep breath and began to speak. "I regret my actions," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I was blinded by my own desires and ambitions. I wish I had made better choices that would have led me down a different path." Kofi paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "To everyone out there, I urge you to learn from my mistakes. Crime may seem like an easy way out, but it only leads to suffering and pain. Make good choices that will lead you to a better life." With those final words, Kofi closed his eyes, and the executioner flipped the switch. The electric chair hummed to life, and Kofi's body jerked violently as the electricity coursed through his veins. And with that, Kofi's life came to an end, a cautionary tale of the dangers of crime and the importance of making good choices. This story is a reminder of the words of Maya Angelou: "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." The seeds you sow in the life of a child have the potential to grow into something bigger than you've ever imagined. The values, beliefs, and habits you instill in them during their formative years can shape their future in profound ways. Just like a small seed planted in fertile soil can grow into a mighty tree, the positive influences you have on a child's life can grow into something truly remarkable. Conversely, the negative seeds you sow can also have a lasting impact. The hurtful words, actions, or behaviors you exhibit can take root and grow into painful memories, low self-esteem, or even destructive habits. As a caregiver, parent, or mentor, you have the power to shape the next generation. The seeds you sow today can grow into a brighter tomorrow, filled with hope, promise, and possibility. So, let us nurture our children with kindness, compassion, and wisdom. Let us plant seeds of love, empathy, and understanding. And let us watch with joy and pride as they grow into capable, confident, and caring individuals who make a positive impact in the world. I hope that my story will inspire you to do better, to be more vigilant, and to prioritize your children's safety above all else. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed and learned from the video. We would love to hear from you. Your feedback means a lot to us. Want to be the first to know when a new video drops? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell to stay updated. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family. Until we come your way again, wishing you a day as bright as your smile. Have an amazing day.